The emergent culture has emerged. So let's talk about it. Of course, you understand about the baby boomers and the baby boom. Right after World War II, Johnny came marching home and started having babies. And there was a sudden increase in the birth rate, and then those birth rates trailed off. Since that time, we have experienced a bit of a second boom, or an echo boom. But let's talk in terms merely of worldview, not of generations. There's a traditional worldview. They tend to be Republicans, rural, conservative, fiscally and socially and politically, traditional church people, you might say blue church, heartlanders. Then there's the modernists, secular humanists, liberal church. There's another culture erode, cultural creatives, postmodernists. Approximately a quarter of the population would be called heartlanders, and about half modernists. Heartlanders, the religious right, traditional families, conservative religion, conventional beliefs. The modernists, materialists, functional atheists, not relationship-oriented, not the religious right. Then comes this third group, sees nature as sacred, green values, believe in religious mysteries. There's stuff out there. Self-actualization, feminism. We'll do just a little bit of comparison now between these. You notice the modernists, functional atheists, and only 15% of heartlanders. Cultural creatives, religious mysteries, but only 19% of the heartlanders believe in those things. Heartlanders are not functional atheists, but on the other hand, they don't believe in miracles. Heartlanders, conventional beliefs. Cultural creatives, very few describe themselves as having conventional beliefs. Modernists describe themselves as not being relationship-oriented. Cultural creatives are relationship-oriented. Relationships are far more important to cultural creatives. Before we get too far, I think mostly we're describing this as white culture. And I think that African Americans have been through an entirely different set of thinking. The African American worldview from 1600 all the way to the end of the Civil War, many of them were slaves. They had no rights. Certainly shapes your worldview. And then came the long era, about 100 years, of what was called the Reconstruction. It was a terrible time to be an African American. You weren't a slave anymore, but maybe all that meant was you don't have a guaranteed income anymore. Jim Crow laws and segregation, they were limited rights. And then came the time of the Civil Rights Movement, 1960 to 1990, we might say, and affirmative action was put into place and so forth. And finally, in the last couple of decades, African Americans have been able to begin to self-actualize. It might be what we would call the hip-hop generation. So this postmodern, this cultural creative mindset, what does that look like? When they come into a traditional church, what do they begin to do? What do you notice about this picture, for example? Well, there's a cross that they probably got from Hobby Lobby, and a bunch of candles and lighting. Artwork that was done by somebody from the congregation that somehow depicts a cross and blood and being washed white and has to do with candles and all of that. The expression of the community, which would be more important in most emerging churches than to have inherited something from previous generations. There's a church in Houston that is an older congregation, and as you can see, a rather small one. And a few years ago, they decided that what they needed to do for the sake of the future of their church is to hire a minister who could take their church that used to be a large church and basically plant a new church inside it on Sunday nights, use the building, but do whatever it takes to reach younger people. And so this pastor is doing that. And here's that same building on a Sunday night. Again, they've got the original artwork going on. They've got the band. They've got the lights, TV monitors, and it's a lot more packed and active. But they're using traditional space and yet making it their own. Here's another church with similar values, might be considered a cultural creative church. It's called Solomon's Porch in Minneapolis. And you notice what they've done is to take furniture. It doesn't match. It's hand-me-downs of living room furniture from different places. And you see they've got candles around and so forth. And the pastor speaks in shorts and from a stool, and everybody sits in the round. You can see at the back of the room there is where the worship team sets up. They're not on front, they're not on the stage, and they project on walls in different places. The walls are painted colors, but not bright, pastel light colors. Off-white basically is what most churches do, but they're taking some risks with some darker colors. Jay Baker started a church called it Revolution in the city of Atlanta, and they meet at a rave club and have Tuesday night Bible studies there. And again, he sits on a stool, he talks into a microphone, and it's a very casual kind of almost egalitarian approach. They still have the contemporary music in their worship, and the guitarist plays harmonics. Mosaic Church in Los Angeles, they had a building, and they decided to sell that building and to become a portable church that meets multiple locations around LA. They meet on Sunday morning, they meet again on Sunday night. They set up everything, but again, you notice the semicircular seating, you notice the use of lights, you notice the ubiquitous stool for the pastor. There's a church called Sojourn Church in Louisville that is also one of these emerging churches with the creative culture. Now, the church at the time that this picture was taken met in an old Mennonite church, which was a converted synagogue. Since that time, they are now using an art gallery and so forth, but you can see how they fill it up, how they use the screen, and try to use the space for their own purposes. Here's the communion table at that church, and you see it's got goblets that they apparently made themselves, a table that somebody in the church made themselves, and use of candles and so forth. Very common theme. And I've got this picture here to show that not everybody is young in that church. There are some older folks there as well. Solomon's Porch, other than their Sunday morning gatherings, for the most part they meet in homes, and so they might be considered house churches. They have meals together. So that's use of space and use of the Sunday morning time, and how cultural creatives have shaped the church.